Welcome to the Generation X-Wing podcast, a modern look at a retro lifestyle. My name is Rob Williams, and I am by myself, kinda by myself. Anil can't make it today. He's got daddy duties. Jamie and Steve have moving duties. Those dudes have been moving all over the place. So I thought, why not bring in a ringer? And I'd talk about one of my favorite things to celebrate 9 years of podcasting. We're going to talk to Tim from the Nerd Room podcast. Hello, Tim.
What's going on, my brother? I am stoked to be back on Gen X. It's been a while. It's been a while since we chatted.
Been a while. It's fellow Commonwealth member, and I still have fond memories of that. In fact, it's Corey's birthday today as of this recording.
No way.
Did you know that?
No, I did not.
Thank you, Facebook, by the way. Iconic sound Corey. It's just, I from the Tumbling Saber podcast. And today we're going to be talking about podcasts. And you and me have been doing this for 9 years. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah, we both started around the same time.
And the reason I chose this topic is because you've started a business involving podcasts, which we will get into later, but also because since you and me are kind of celebrating similar milestones, I want to talk about how podcasts has changed over the years, what got us into it, some of the challenges we've had, some of the wonderful things that have come out of podcasting, and some of the things and where we're going to go from here. Like, where do you see podcasting down the road? And so we're going to take a step away from the pop culture stuff, because I know that in the Nerd Room, you talk a lot about Marvel and collecting, and God, I want to talk. I was just listening to your episode on movies, the movie experience and collecting itself. And I really want to talk about that, but today's podcasting. So if you want to check that out, please go to the Nerd Room podcast. It's wonderful stuff. So I want to hear your origin story. How did you get involved in podcasting in general?
Man, I'd love to throw out this story, this amazing, incredible story, but it's a very simple one, and it really was born out of a love and a desire of pop culture and wanting to share and experience it with other people. I found early days when if you're watching on YouTube or whatever, I've got all these action figures and all this stuff behind me, and I didn't have a ton of friends that I interacted with on a daily basis that loved this stuff as much as I did. The MCU, Star Wars, all of the Ninja Turtles, even going back to my youth, Jurassic Park, all this stuff. I loved it so much, and I just wanted to find people in the community to discuss it with. And that was really how my podcasting journey started. And my buddy Sanjay and him and I used to walk. We used to call it the walk to the comic book shop. And we'd walk there every Wednesday, Comic Book Wednesday. We'd walk up there. We'd have these fantastic chats. And then one day he's just said to me, I've been listening to Kevin Smith. He does podcasting, and he says everyone should be doing podcasting because it's easy, low barrier for entry. Let's just jump into it. And he said, okay, I bought a mic, show up to my room. On our Instagram, at the NerdRM, cheap plug, I posted a photo.
I saw that
the other day, celebrating our, what would be our 9th year, I guess. We took a picture on the very first day. It's just him and I in this tiny room with this tiny little microphone, and we just talked about, I think we started talking about DC or just introducing ourselves. So I have no idea, but that was back in 2015 when we started doing that, and it kind of evolved from there into being probably one of my most favorite things on planet Earth when it comes to hobbies and personal things, is podcasting, is getting behind the mic, expressing myself, finding this creative path that I didn't even know existed, and I didn't even know I had in myself to follow. But here we are 9 years later, and that's it. It just really was born out of a love, passion to, one, share my experiences, and two, find a community to share them with.
So that's awesome, because I've listened to your show. I got to shout out to Sanjay, because every time I get a kick out. It's like we talk. Sorry, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, because when we find ourselves podcasts and we find those little things that make us unique, and Sanjay's is his intro, and I'm Sanjay, and it's just like you try to find that unique take that makes you stand out from all the other podcasts. And the Nerd Room, the name itself is quite alluring. I feel it's a great name because everybody's got that nerd room. I mean,
Yes, that's it.
we've heard of many well-known people on YouTube talk about their nerd room, and it's kind of cool. And you've got in your background, obviously, you've got all your displays and toys and stuff like that. So, and if you've ever watched, we know Mike Tarkin.
Yes. Love
Like he's on his videos just lately. He's been putting up his new room, his nerd room, and it's a great name. So how'd you decide on that? Was it just simply, hey, this is it, this is my room?
Yeah, well, it's kind of taken on its own form because so like the actual origins of the name the Nerd Room comes directly from my wife. So as we got together, you know, coming out of university, first job, moved out to Calgary, I didn't bring all this stuff with me. I was like, okay, I'm going to a new spot. Let's kind of ease into this. I don't want to just show up with all this stuff and be like, here, this is me. And in hindsight, I probably should have done that, but at the end of the, my wife and I, we got together, blah, blah, blah. Fast forward a few years, bought a house. We got this nice house with a spare bedroom. I said, look, would you mind if I set some stuff up in here? I'm kind of like, she knew at this point that I was a giant nerd, but can I start setting stuff up? Like, I'd love to display my action figures and all this. And at that time when we moved in, it was like 2014. The MCU was just gaining momentum. Star Wars was on its way back. So I had all this stuff that I wanted to put up, display, and experience in my own house. And she kind of jokingly said one day, go upstairs and check out Tim's nerd room to a set of friends. And like beat red, I go like embarrassments. I'm like, I don't like it. And like, I really didn't like the name for a very, very long time. I thought it was her kind of poking fun at me a little bit. And you know, sometimes the nerd connotation doesn't come off as well.
It's derogatory. That's my word.
Yeah, it's exactly. You can't call me that. That's what I call myself. And it kind of just took on its own form, and people started calling it that. People started getting excited when they come to my house. Come go check out the nerd room. What have you got new? And you know, people started getting really kind of engaged with it. And so when the idea of the podcast came up, it was the only name that we ever had. We never debated any other name for that. And as it's evolved, I've kind of in my head rationalized this name out in several different ways. One, it always kind of represents, like you said, a safe space to come and chat about nerd, chat about the things that you love. Like you come in here, gloves are off, jacket off, boom, we're talking about nerd. Like that's it. That's what we're doing. So you know you can come here. Two, everyone kind of has their space. And so this is just an audio representation of everyone's space. Mm-hmm. And three, and this is the one that I've made up in my head, and it goes to kind of the last point. One of my favorite bands growing up, and still to this date, is Linkin Park. And they had this cool thing about their name that every city kind of has a Linkin Park in it somewhere, especially in the States. And right. So every city they go to, they kind of feel like they're at home. And that's what I want that name to represent. If I could steal from them a little bit and just say, you know, everyone's got their own nerd room, man cave, she shed, whatever you want to call it. Everyone's got one. So everyone could kind of relate to it. And so that's kind of how, although in a very, at the start, kind of a poking fun name, that's kind of how it's evolved into something that has become very important and meaningful to me.
You owned it. You owned it.
I own it. I own it. I own the domains. I own everything now.
I remember hearing Sting talk about why they chose the name The Police. It says you get the best advertisement in every city.
Yeah.
It's just like it's on all the cars, but it's a great name. And I guess for people starting up a podcast, and one of the things personally I like to do when it comes to, you know, YouTube shows and the podcast is teach. I'm hoping we can teach a little bit of our limited knowledge of podcasting. I mean, we don't have a major podcast like some of the big people out there, but we've done this for 9 years. We do have some knowledge. And so the first thing that everybody has to do is pick the right name. And I feel that you did that very well. And I actually feel pretty confident that we did that as well.
I love your name. You have one of the best podcast names in the history of podcasting. Like, it's unbelievable that to me that you guys got to 2015 and no one had taken that yet.
Well, I guess so, because we took ours based off a Matthew Goodband song. And it's a great name for it. It signifies our generation, our nerd level. Mm-hmm. And you could, I'm surprised nobody's taken Millennial Falcon or
Yeah.
the Gen Y wing or anything like that. It's just, but it's
Sorry, the Millennium Falcon, just that one just clicked in my head what you actually meant by that. A little bit of a delayed reaction.
but they're kind of, it's we were happy. Our original name, like the one I had was pushing for, was a stupid ass name. It was the Water Cooler Warriors, because they just imagine people hanging around a water cooler just talking nerd stuff, and I'm glad they shot me down on that one. And but it was that thing, like, we got to find the right name, something that works, something that clicks, and something that you remember. And I feel that one does click with our generation, not so much with younger people, because they hear X-Wing and it just kind of moves on. But
Mm-hmm.
finding that right name that stands out, easy to say. The challenge with something like ours was the email. It was such a long Generation X-Wing podcast at gmail.com. Yeah. And so I remember having those thoughts. Do we do Gen X-Wing, JXW? GXW. How do we do this? And I had to think about branding. I had to think
Yes.
about, how do we say it quickly? How do we say it so people will understand? And I honestly think we lucked out. And I think yours is great too, because it's, as you said, it's a Lincoln Park in every town or something like that, right? It's just, everybody has a nerd room, and it's easy to remember. I think you and me have actually done well in that field.
Yeah. And I think when you talk about branding too, you're talking about the education piece of it all. And I love that aspect. If there's one person listening that can take a little bit away with this and starts this fantastic podcast, I'm all there for it. The branding thing too, once you get an @ it's got to be consistent across everything. So we had a hard time getting the nerd room because when we started, there's people that had it, and so we
really?
we went with the Nerd RM, like the short form for room.
That's right, I do remember that.
And
yeah.
So like it's the Nerd RM for everything: Twitter, Instagram, with the exception of our website, which is the nerdroom.net. That's the only place where we have full room, and we even contemplated the nerdrm.net or .com or whatever, because it's about keeping consistent. At least that this is always the same thing. And yeah, ideally we would have loved that initial branding piece, but the consistency, like you guys are Gen X, right? Like that, it works. And so you need it to be short enough, and you need to be consistent is the key, so that you're not saying like, catch me on Instagram at the NerdRM, but catch me on Twitter at Tim the Nerd Podcast. You know what I mean? Like it's got to be something that just clicks and goes. And sometimes that's hard to find, especially now, like this late in the game in social media. It's difficult to find short handles that make sense, that connect directly to your podcast.
And especially with Star Wars, I mean, there are only just a few Star Wars podcasts out there. And so one of the things that we were worried about was, when we chose a name, do we have to consistently talk about just Star Wars? Because the market is saturated, and it did become a concern, at least for me personally, that when it started to become like everybody, I couldn't keep up with the news. I was not a type of person to keep up with the news. I just wanted to talk about cool stuff. But how much could we talk about Star Wars? So it was kind of like, well, let's kind of do movie reviews, because there are lots of that. And my brain was always thinking about the way I listen to podcasts. I listen to podcasts. I don't listen to the big people. I like to listen to people that are much smaller, around my level, because they're a little more genuine. They're honest. They're rough around the edges, but they're honest. And especially the ones that do shows, I will binge if it's like a TV show and they're doing every episode, a podcast of every episode. Four Finger Discount, for example, the Great Simpsons podcast. I will listen to it episode by episode, and some movie podcasts, I'll listen to the movies I like, and I can go back to it. And I notice, this one was out in 2019. This one's out in 2020. I don't have to be up to date. Whereas a review of the latest Andor trailer, to me, always felt, well, that's going to be old news in a week. And we can't keep up with that because of our schedules. So let's just try to do it where you watch the show, come back to it. And that was our focus. I don't know about you guys, how you chose the format of the show. What was that process like?
Yeah, and it's an always evolving, it's always fluid format.
It has
right?
to.
You have to be able to change things up and not be afraid to try different things. One thing that we've gone through in the changes of the podcast is our lineup of hosts and co-hosts. We started with 2, we grew to 3, we grew to 4, and then we went back down to just me at one point.
Yeah.
And then recently, our buddy Ian's come and join the fray. And so we're kind of back up to 2, and that's we've kind of found a nice ideal back and forth in that space. And so you have to adjust for that. And so your format also has to consider how many people you have at the table, because I always say when you have one extra person on the pod, let's assume that you're targeting a 30 to 45 minute podcast. Each new person you add to the podcast adds at least 15 minutes to that podcast length.
Yep.
And so you have 4 people at the table. You're going to have a hard time being under an hour and a half when you're doing kind of the typical Talking Heads podcast, opinions and movies and all that stuff. And so for your format, you have to consider the amount of hosts and co-hosts that you have, and how you're going to manage all of those opinions so they're not repetitive across the board. And when it comes to content, we struggle with the same concept as well. And the Nerd Room was always meant to be a broad stroke across pop culture without specifically saying exactly what we were about. We at one point had branded ourselves the Nerd Room Podcast, a comic book and movie podcast. But we felt that was way too broad. Like, what do you talk? Like, people who like want to just hear about movies don't really want to hear about comics sometimes, and vice versa. And so we went down at one point to a Star Wars, Marvel, and DC podcast. And so we're trying to be very much more specific about the audiences we were targeting inside of the name. And then at one point we just kind of said Star Wars, Marvel, DC, and beyond. So just those 3, and then everything else that resides in the nerd environment. And you spoke to the idea of evergreen podcasting and that concept of movie reviews and talking about things that can remain current, whether it was recorded in 2019 or recorded in 2024. We struggle with that all the time because we are not an evergreen podcast. We have movie reviews that you can do, but those are periodic throughout the year. We have traditionally followed news cycles, which does mean that your catalog, your library, is not something that people return to. And so you don't see a volume of downloads coming from back catalog listens, because people just essentially hop in at the point at present and move forward from there. They will explore some of the focus episodes that we do. We try to do evergreen episodes once in a while, but what we are kind of limited by in that format, not only from an evergreen perspective, is also our prep time. And that's something that we've always considered with our format, is that there's almost zero prep time for what we do. Because we live and breathe pop culture, we're essentially just jumping on, giving our opinions about what's happening, what's the latest rumor, what's the trailer, what's the movie coming out, these type of things, the box office, all these elements. But we just show up and talk about it. I'll spend maybe 20 minutes writing down a brief bullet point about the order of things, so that at least has a flow to it. We're not jumping around different topics. But because we're family guys, family men, whatever you want to call us, we have jobs. This is a hobby. It becomes very difficult to put 3, 4, 5 hours into prepping a podcast. That some people do, and those are phenomenal. And if I'm being honest with you, I truly wish I could do that, because I would love to do more cinematic takes on discussions. But in my life, I just don't have the time. And so that's another thing that we always had to consider, was that none of us had time to do 3 hours of research to talk about a specific topic. And that's, to be honest with you, why we got away from talking about comic books, because a lot of us weren't finding the time to sit and read them, and we're trying to binge through them, rush, and then you just don't have the informed discussions. And so we try to keep it very high level. Low barrier for entry has always been our MO, where literally anyone, like, you could be a periphery Marvel fan, you could be someone that shows up and only watches the Avengers films, but you could still listen to our podcast and take something away from it. You're not going to feel overwhelmed, or like you're not welcomed because you don't have this history of knowledge with everything. It's meant to be, we've always called it kind of the spot you take or the bridge between the person that goes to the movie and the person that is heavily involved in the fandom. We're that bridge. We're like, if you want to go over there, you come across the Nerd Room Bridge, and we can get you there. But we're not those guys. We're not the in-depth. They exist and they're awesome. But we're also not the people that are sitting in the movie theater and just exit and forget. We're kind of the in-between space. And so if you're looking for that enhancement of experience, we're trying to always be that podcast where we can provide you that extra little context, point you where you need to go. And if you stick around with us, that's great. And if you go find something bigger and better, we've also accomplished our job too.
You got to find your niche, I
Exactly.
guess. Is that a good word for it?
That's a huge pop or podcasting buzz thing right now. Is
When
you are your niche, like you are your own person, you are your own brand, you are your own podcast, and like that's what people are coming to check out.
And sometimes some people's ideas, like Star Wars Minute, has amazing concept. I explained the idea. Do you know Star Wars Minute, for
Mm-hmm.
example? Basically, those who don't know Star Wars Minute, Star Wars Minute is a podcast where they analyze the Star Wars movies 1 minute at a time, from minute 1 to minute 2.
It's
Let's talk
amazing.
about just that minute. Okay, minute 2, next episode, minute 2 to minute 3. Let's talk about. I try to explain that to my friends, and they're like, what the hell, who will listen to that? You
Me.
have the best conversations talking about just how Luke's hand flops on the ground, and then they make jokes, and they're very knowledgeable, and that's a key thing too. You have to be knowledgeable. You just can't say, oh, that's cool. The Chris Farley, remember when? But it's just like you have to have you have to have this knowledge base, and you build your charisma, you build your comfort level, which I want to talk to you about in a sec here. But it's just like some concepts. What's a niche that maybe that fits you, but also you're comfortable with and you're willing to do for the next little while and can take you for the next little while? Because I see a lot of podcasts that have fantastic things, and it's just like there's no end to this. The only thing that'll stop them is them themselves
Yeah.
on this concept. So, but I want to ask you, like, over 9 years, how do you feel you've grown as a podcaster? Because one thing that when you were talking last time about the hosts and the number of hosts that come in, and understanding that, one thing you taught me, I remember having a discussion a couple of years ago about how to be a proper host, how to keep the engagement, and how to balance the conversation. And typically, we've met those people who talk and just wait for their turn to talk, but you're with friends, and that's a good thing. You have to find that co-host that is, and I've been fortunate to have every single co-host who's been a friend. But how do you what is something that you've learned over the last 9 years that has really helped you? How have you grown?
Yeah, well, I'd say I guess there's a couple different ways I could go with this one. I said, me personally, as a podcaster over the last 9 years, I'd say my confidence in managing a conversation, and really, I can talk about anything now. You put me in a room, and I could make a conversation out of it, and that's just it's a trait. It's something that I've learned through doing this, through managing people in different conversations in different environments, whether it's in person, virtual. It's something that I'm so confident in now, and that's translated into my job for doing presentations, for talking to people, to whomever. I'm able to kind of weave my way through conversations a lot more efficiently and effectively, and I can kind of, for lack of a better term, I can kind of BS my way through a lot of things now, which is interesting. And I'd say from that conversation that you and I had a couple years ago, when it comes to the idea of managing conversations, it becomes so important on these podcasts to be able to, especially like, I call them talking head podcasts, when you just have like 3 or 4 people just kind of going around a circle.
Yeah.
There's 2 things I always try to do. One is this concept of never asking the same person the same question. And that gets away from this idea of, so Rob, what do you think about this scene? So Anil, what do you think about this scene? What do Steve, what do you think about this scene? And it just becomes repetitive, and that's not how a real conversation happens, right? You have interjection, you have the conversation evolving as it goes, and so as a host, you have to try to do that. So I'll look at one person, I'll say, pull this in, and then I'll take a little bit of piece from what he said, and I'll bring in a new idea, but also still backdoor the next person's ability to say what they want about everything, and try to manage the conversation in that way. And the other thing that I try to do is what I call pulling on the thread. So this concept of pulling on a sweater, the thread opens up. The more you pull, the more you get out of it. And so it's, as a host, it's just kind of finding something and tugging, and pull, especially when you're interviewing someone, to get more and more out of them. You want people to dig deeper. You don't want that superficial answer. You want people to dig deep into the recesses of their consciousness and of their experiences, and really get at the mic what that is, because that's what people are tuning in for. And they're not tuning in to hear people say, oh, it's cool. They want to hear your opinion, and whether they agree with it or not is a completely different discussion.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's kind of managing the people as well as keeping the conversation interesting, and
Yeah.
that comes to people management. A lot of it.
And your relationship with your co-hosts is a big deal
Mm-hmm.
too. I mean, I've seen some people start a podcast and there's like looking for co-hosts, and they are lucky to find people that they interact with. But it is important. I remember when we started our podcast. I don't know if it's the same with you. We did ours in person. Did you
Mm-hmm.
guys do yours in person?
Yeah, we did
Like you're all
right
in the
up.
same room with the mic. There it
Yeah,
is.
right up until we each had a microphone. Right up until the week of shutdown, we did it in
Yeah.
person
Same
from
here.
2015 all the way through until whatever that was, early 2020.
It's kind of cool that in-person feeling of you can read each other's body language and know when the
Yeah.
person's going to stop talking. And that sounds like a dumb thing, but it's real. I find myself interrupting way more now
Mm-hmm.
because I can't read their body language. I can't read their when they're done as quickly as I do when they're in person now. But it has opened up our schedules a little bit more. We used to travel from all the way downtown into an office, and it was a hard travel. And at the time, I was married with a new baby, and now it's just like online, and it's made things a little easier. But challenges are still there, like the technological challenges. But yeah, just the body language stuff I've always found interesting. But I want to ask you about technological challenges or growth over the time, because I struggle big time. And like you're actually, I'm doing this for the first time on, was this StreamYard?
StreamYard. Let's hope it turns out all right and it's not a
Let's,
giant
yeah, and I
nightmare.
hope so, because I'm looking at it and I can see on the video like there's my green screen showing, and I'm not used to that sort of thing. But I still want to learn how to do something better, because Zoom's okay, but I want to be able to do live streams. I want to be able to
Mm-hmm.
interact with that one or two people that might actually be listening at that time. What are some of the challenges that you've had technological with the tech over the last 9 years or so?
Yeah, so like you said, we started in a room together. The guys at one point I had 3 guys showing up every single Tuesday without fail. Minus 30, plus 30, didn't matter. Everyone was there. We were in the basement. We're
Yeah.
around the table chatting. But like you said, that was a lot of time. Like it was always at my house because I did the post and I had all the
Yeah.
equipment and everything. So I benefited from that. But we had to stick to a pretty strict schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And when the pandemic arrived, we started on Zoom. We did Google, whatever it is, Google Chat or whatever it is, and we did some like hybrid of Facebook. Like we tried everything, and we just found we weren't getting the sound quality out of it, and that really bothered me. And so we'd run it through all these programs to try to improve the sound quality, and you'd always get that echoey feel to it. So the pandemic, as detrimental as it was to a lot of things, the tech really benefited from a recording and quality perspective.
Yeah.
The advent of things, or the, I guess, expansion of things like Zoom's okay. We use Zoom for a long time, but StreamYard, Riverside, Squadcast, there's these environments now that exist where they record locally, so you get the quality of the microphone as if you were recording right next to each other. You get the video recording locally. It all uploads to a cloud, so you can download it from wherever and work on it from wherever. So that has been like a massive tool that's been put into the belts of podcasters recently, because that also now opens up for having interviews. You and I interacting. You're sitting in Vancouver, I'm in Calgary.
Yes.
And this is going to feel like we're side by side, seamless, because of the quality, and it allows us to be a lot more flexible with things. Like I had a work meeting up until like 45 minutes ago, and we're half an hour into the record, so it allowed me just to spin one way from my work computer to here and start recording. And so
Yeah.
technology, although I agree with you, the in-person is much better from a people management, a vibe, a feel, a style. The virtual has opened up a completely different world and opened you up to having so many people on your
Yes.
podcast while maintaining the quality. Because the one thing I always say about podcasts and podcast production is it's okay if you don't like me as a host, my voice, my how I pronounce things, how I frame conversation. I can't control that. That's just me. If you don't like me, that's cool. You can move on. You cannot like the content. You show up and you don't like the fact that we talk about the MCU a lot. that's cool. You can go find another podcast that talks about DC or Star Wars. But I don't want people showing up and listening to the podcast and being like, this does not sound good. I can't listen to this because it sounds bad.
Yeah.
I can control that. And fundamentally, I never want someone leaving my podcast because of the sound quality. And so investing like these, like StreamYard's about like $20-$30 a month. So investing a little bit into your hobby to amplify your production quality is worth it at the end of the day. And all of these have various pros and cons. And like StreamYard's great for hooking up with YouTube, but it's harder to translate, and they're working on it, but it's harder to translate the video into like Instagram Reels or anything like that, just to have the formatting, where Riverside does that better. Riverside's a bit more clunkier on the live streaming, and so there's gives and takes on all of these platforms, but fundamentally they all do the same thing, especially when you're doing in studio recording. They're all wonderful.
When I started the podcast hobby, it was so overwhelming. Like, which mic should I get? What's a good one? Is it a Yeti? Is it a Blue? Is it a Zoom? Which one should I have? Should I invest $100-$300 into a mic, into this hobby, or what is a $50 mic? It was just so overwhelming, and I didn't know where to look at. YouTube was a great source for those, for teaching me how to edit or how to upload onto the server, whatever it was. But it was just overwhelming. And so what's the best suggestion you have for those who are just starting and trying to figure out, like, sound quality is important to me? It's not the most important, but it is somewhat important. You need to at least hear the person, and it's still, today we still work with it. I'm needing to have to get a Neil a mic or so now, and we try to not have something that sounds too clunky. But what's advice for those who are just starting out and about the tech issues?
Yeah, I'd say, to me, if you're investing in the hobby, in like any other hobby, right? Let's take golfing, for example, right? You're not going to buy the lowest end clubs. You might go for the middle of the range clubs, so that you don't spend a ton of money, but you're also getting something that has some quality that will allow you to learn and then potentially excel and elevate yourself to the next level. Then you can make that bigger investment. I would take podcasting the same way, is that you go for a middle of the road microphone. You're going to spend like $200, maybe $300 on a good quality microphone, but you can also get ones that are reasonable, that have a bit of adaptability to them, in around that $100 to $150 range. There's one, the Audio Technica, it was $2,100. I don't know what it is now, but it was an XLR as well as a USB microphone. So it was a bit more dynamic in the sense that you could plug it directly into your computer and run it directly from there. But also, if you had an amplifier, or whatever you want to call it.
Are you talking something like that with the 3 prongs or something like that?
Yeah, the 3 prongs is the XLR. Sorry, yeah. So that you can plug in that way. You're gonna get the best quality out of that. But not everyone has a like an amplifier that you can plug into, that you can feed a microphone through and then back through into your computer.
Right.
If you want to take and do multiple guests or multiple hosts, you need to have XLR microphones to plug into an amp. And I'm using the wrong word there, but I can't remember what it's called. But so having something that has a bit more of dynamic use to it, where you can just plug and play. Like if you go on holidays and you want to take your microphone, you don't want to take all this gear. You need something with a USB hookup. Boom, you can do that. But if you want to elevate a little bit more, so there's a couple of the Audio Technicas that have the duals. They are both XLR and USB. When you elevate into kind of that Shure, SHURE, those microphones, there's like a really high end one that's like $500 or $600, but there's also a middle of the road one that's almost of equal quality, that it's in around that $250 range. So like if you want to start there, I think that's where you invest the money. You invest the money in a quality microphone. And most people, like, I've been doing podcasting for like 9+ years on the exact same iMac. Like I bought a Mac or whatever it is, the MacBook.
Right.
Laptop. I bought it when I started podcasting, and I've been using the same one ever since. I use GarageBand to edit.
Yes, me too.
I have a couple programs that I bought, like Isotope, which helps me with noise reduction and taking out kind of background noise and all that kind of stuff. But not like, I don't have like a super high end workflow even after doing it all these years. And a lot of that is just about efficiency. Like I don't have time to sit and edit for 6-7 hours and make this thing pristine. And that's why investing in the microphone and some of the equipment up front takes a lot of that back end work out.
Hmm.
where you're not having to invest that time. So it comes down to saving time. And ultimately, like doing this for 9 years, I've upgraded my microphone once, and I'm looking to maybe do a second upgrade here in the next like 6 to 8 months. And
Right.
that's just to kind of elevate the quality just that little extra bit. And I don't even know if people will hear that when I switch microphones, but yeah, ultimately it's like, it's one of those hobbies that it's very easy to get into. You can go on Amazon. You can get a
Hmm.
package off Amazon for like $200 to $300 that includes a boom stand, pop filters, a microphone, and all the cords. And you're ready. You like plug and you're ready to go. You're ready to podcast. And like I
Yeah.
said last week when I posted the photo celebrating kind of our 9 year, is the photo showed it's very easy to start podcasting. It's very difficult
It is.
to continue podcasting.
I love that because I hear people talking about celebrating, like we just celebrated 400th episode,
Mm-hmm.
and a part of it, the only thing that was stopping us was us. The
Mm-hmm.
only reason we would not be doing this is because we eventually would either run out of ideas or we just lost passion in it, and that's a challenge. But the tech part of it is, for me personally, a challenge. Trying to, because I'm not very up on this stuff. You talked about putting things onto Instagram. Those are things I'd love to do. I just learned how to do shorts. I'm starting to understand how to edit better. I love the editing process. It's one
Mm-hmm.
of my favorite things.
You're
But
awesome at it too.
I appreciate that. But I don't have the time anymore.
Yeah.
It's like when you're a single dad and you got to get the podcast out in a couple of days. Before, I would spend like hours I would spend like 3-4 hours editing one audio podcast. And because I want to put this little soundbite here and make sure this level here, all with GarageBand. And
Mm-hmm.
GarageBand is really good. It's not the best, but it's so easy to use. And I use iMovie for the videos. And again,
Mm-hmm.
I would love to learn how to use something different. I'm nervous because I know it will take a lot of time to learn this, how to use this new system, time that I can't sacrifice when I only have my son half the time. So
Yeah.
it's trying to find the gives and the takes. It's as you were talking about with the clubs, how much am I willing to spend, and how important is this hobby to me?
Yeah. Well, and
So
like even with your workflows and all that, it's been amazing in the last couple of years how much more efficient my workflows have become because of the technology. Things like StreamYard, and they're starting now to integrate, like I said before, integrating where you can literally create your reels inside of
yeah.
these online softwares where it's just boom, you select it and extract it, and then you dump it into another app, and it will automatically through AI, it'll develop all of the speech bubbles and all that, like the closed captioning.
I've always wondered about that, how it works.
Takes two
Yeah.
seconds. It's like there's a couple
Wow.
apps that I use that just generates it, boom, and it throws it up there. And some of these they automatically do that, and AI has become something that's being integrated into people's workflows and all that. Like some people use there's a software called The Script, and
Mhm.
people use AI to edit podcasts, like where they're I've tried it. I don't think it's the most robust way to edit,
Mhm.
but I'm a kind of old school, go in, listen to it, and kind of take things to make sure it sounds like a conversation.
Right.
And that requires you to leave in ums and ahs sometimes.
Yeah.
But this will go in and it will transcribe everything, and then it will highlight all the ums and ahs, and you can literally delete them on the fly, and it'll delete and then the AI will merge back together the podcast, the actual audio.
Dude.
And it's not, like I said, the version I used and what I tried, I felt that it just wasn't there. You could hear, as an editor, you could hear the edit
Mhm.
inside of it. Maybe other people wouldn't, but I could hear.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get that little
Yep.
there's like a little snap or a little where the background noise slightly changed a little bit.
A little bit, you catch the end of your breath
Yeah,
or something like
exactly.
that.
Breathing
Yeah.
is the worst for editing.
Oh, Steve makes fun of me all the time with my heavy breathing.
Yeah.
It's just like, I could hear you breathing. It's just, dude, I'm passionate. But yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I mean, it has changed so much over the last 9 years. I couldn't imagine any of this like when we started.
No.
Even around COVID time, I can't imagine a lot of this stuff. It's just starting to develop. I guess during COVID, everybody had some free time to just really play with things.
Oh yeah, and like you look at in COVID too, how many new podcasts entered the space.
Yeah.
Like I think I can't remember the exact numbers, but we're talking like orders of magnitude, like millions upon millions of new podcasts added during the pandemic. that as
Hmm.
soon as lockdown ended, they all stopped.
Yeah.
And that created like this flurry of investment in podcasting as well because of how many people were doing it. And now we're kind of leveled off, I think, again from that pandemic high. Like
Yeah.
there's these peaks and valleys inside of the podcasting industry. You've got like your super OGs that started, early 2000s, mid 2000s, and kind of went through. You've got what I would consider the peak of fan casting, which started in 2014, like where you and I hopped on in through 2017, and that freaking nosedived when the pandemic started. Fan
Hmm.
casting, and then I think now we're in the then you got into the rise of celebrity podcasting, what I like to call portfolio podcasting, where
Yeah.
you had all these people come in that were actors or athletes or whatever, and podcasting became a portfolio piece for
Yep.
them, where they got at the mics once in a while, highly produced thing, but they weren't in it as we are as indie podcasters as a hobby. It was part of their portfolio, part of their brand was the podcast. And then now you've gotten into the what I would consider more of the like the health, the wellness, the high quality cinematic interviewing type Diary of a CEO, these type of podcasts that have now emerged where they're not front loaded by someone that is famous, but they do have a lot of famous people on them talking about real life issues. Like that's become
Yeah.
very big in 2023 and now into 2024. And so the evolution of the industry is fantastic, and always in the background has been the true crime stories. That's always been that's always been super hype. So if you're looking at doing one of those, whew, a lot of research, a lot of
Yeah.
effort, a lot of production, but man, did those do well.
I we are going to talk about some of our personal favorite podcasts, but I know that evolution is key, evolving and growing, and not trying to catch the latest trend, because you see that in YouTube. I watch a lot of YouTube. My son
Mm-hmm.
watches a lot of YouTube, and there's a lot of that sort of thing. And some people can really jump on that. Mr. Beast is an example of that. People like Unspeakable, FaZe Rug, they're very well known to jump on these trends and such. But it can be a flash of the pan and you're gone and you're
Mm-hmm.
done with. And podcast is there's nothing. Podcasting is similar to that. You can jump on the reaction videos and all that stuff, but what are you going to do down the road? You do have to evolve.
Mm-hmm.
Trends are important, but this is going to lead me into my next thing, and it leads to your job that you have now, or your business that you run, I should say. You explain the business that you have, because it does relate to connecting with others and trying to, for me, that's important, learn from others.
Yeah, yeah. So this is I wish it was my full-time job. It's just my sidekick at this point.
Oh, is
But
it?
yeah, no, I definitely wish it was, but it's not. So to go back to the podcast origin story, to go back to this idea of wanting to build a community to share an experience with. I've always had this idea in the back of my head about how can I take that and translate that into something that can be a job, a career, a business, something. And I've always had this like entrepreneurial mindset, but never been able to put it into practice. And recently, in what it was April, May of last year, I actually ran the podcast stage at Calgary Fan Expo. And so I was able to, they kind of gave me free reign to bring in podcasts, build up people. And I kind of did a unique take on it. Well, not unique for the Fan Expo, where I said the front half of the day is kind of more of the education piece, how-to podcasts, these type of things. And the back half of the day is live podcasts. And so bring in specifically fan podcasts, because we're at the expo talking about Star Wars and all these type of things. So I ran that. And in doing so, I linked up with a gentleman who used to run a conference in Calgary, a podcast conference in Calgary and Edmonton called PodSummit. Ran for 3 years. I went to PodSummit in 2019. And so in doing so, I kind of contacted him. I said, like, how did you, I was looking for people to talk to build out the podcast stage for the Calgary Expo. And in talking to him, he kind of said, like, look, if you're looking to want to take something bigger on, like, I'm looking to sell PodSummit. And I kind of stepped back and I thought, is this opportunity slapping me directly in the face? And I kind of talked to my wife about it, and I said, let me talk to him and see what he thinks. And so, long story short, we ended up buying the intangible assets off him. So the brand, the logo, the website, the domain, all that kind of stuff. and we took that and we transformed it into a business. And we're now relaunching here in 2024 with the first new PodSummit YYC 2024 it's called, and it'll be happening September 20th through 21st in Calgary, Alberta, and it's meant to be a Canadian collaborative focal point where we're bringing together podcasters in a conference style event to network, engage, interact, and learn from one another. We want people to come and create a community around Canadian podcasting, because this is something that we've wanted to do for a while, but it's really about establishing that community so that the industry can grow and the industry can evolve, to kind of go on to the point that you were talking about there, because every industry on planet Earth benefits from conferences, from networking, from events. And Canadian podcasting, just there's a few things that happen out east, out in Toronto, but nothing at scale in Canada. And so we said, well, why don't we try to create that? Why don't we try to create that collaborative focal point for podcasters to come together to learn from one another? Because that is the only way we're going to evolve personally and collectively, is by sharing our experiences and understanding where this industry goes, where does podcasting grow, how do individuals get in, how do individuals progress to professionals? Like, all of those are the questions that we're going to try to at least answer or put people on the right path at PodSummit. And so it's really born out of the podcast origin story and translated into something much bigger. And we're super excited about the potential for this and the growth opportunities that we see inside of this. And so we just signed the venue. It's at the Grand. It's a beautiful old 112-year-old theater in Calgary. It's this like awesome, unique venue that is meant to inspire and instill creativity as soon as you walk through the door. And so it's my wife and I that are running this, and she's an event planner by background, and so it's kind of this like wonderful marriage of ideas through my podcast experience and her ability to execute. And it's something that like it scares the hell out of me, but it also excites me to no end. It's like I'm super pumped about it all.
Oh, that sounds super exciting, because I know that I'm the type of person that needs to talk to somebody, learn off somebody, just sit down with them. Not YouTube videos are great, but sitting down and just taking the time and to learn off other people is how we grow. I'm an educator. We do that in our professional development days. We talk to each other and we grow as teachers and educators. So this is something that's tempting for me too. This is awesome.
Like I said
this.
At the start, there's a ticket for you, man.
I know. It's just the Calgary part. It's just like getting out there is going to be tough.
It's just a little pop over the mountain. I do it like a couple times a year. I come out your way.
It's easy. I seriously will talk. I'll talk to you off air about that and look into that. So I want to know more about this. But this isn't like a sell job. It's just, I think this is important that we do learn off of each other. If this is a hobby or a business, because I'm sure as hell ain't making any money off this thing.
I've never made a dime off podcasting. Never, like that's a lie. I probably made my ad revenue on Podbean is like, a couple bucks a month or something.
Woohoo! Coffee.
It's and that's the thing, like that's a big discussion right now. Like to get into the weeds of the podcasting pieces, like you read the headlines and there's a lot of talk about the bubble has burst and Spotify is like canceling shows left and right because they invested hundreds of millions of dollars into this and they're not seeing the turnaround on ad revenue that they thought that they would. And extrapolate that into streaming services as well. During the pandemic, everyone thought streaming was the way to go. I never thought I was going to be back in a movie theater for the rest of my life in the middle of the pandemic. I was like, I'm satisfied watching it on my TV. I'll never pay another dime to a movie theater. And here we are again. We're all back in the theaters, and streaming services like Disney Plus, they're all hurting because they invested so much money at the onset to get content, to get eyeballs, and get exclusive eyeballs. And Spotify did the same thing, and they invested $300 million in Joe Rogan. So the industry is in this like massive upheaval, and you and I have kind of sitting back in this indie space for so long. Like we've seen all these churns and all this craziness, and so there's this like wealth of knowledge that resides in a handful of podcasters at this point, and I think that's going to be very valuable for the go forward of the industry and how we grow and how we continue to get at this. Like, name one thing other than parent that you've done consistently for the last 9 or 10 years. Like there's almost nothing.
Educate, parent, and procrastinate.
Yeah, right. It's pretty wild when you look back on it. I had some people point out to me recently. They said like, I was considered, because like you and I would consider the people that started in the 2000s, like the mid 2000s, like the OG podcast.
Yes.
And I've had people come up to me like and say like, man, you're an OG, and I'm like, no, I'm not. Like I'm just like a middle of the road dude. I just kind of, and it's like, but when you reflect back on the experiences and what you've seen, the consistency that you guys have brought to the table, 400 plus episodes, 9+ years, like endless, like thousands and thousands of hours of content. It's actually like it's the most consistent, like other than like be a father and a husband, like it's the most consistent thing in my life. Like I've been doing this every Tuesday almost nonstop for 9 years. Like there's no hobby, nothing that I've done that consistently. And so it's incredible when you look at the passion and the tenacity in podcasters. And that's an important trait, I think, that people don't appreciate enough in podcasting in general, is that we're doing, like, for the most part, a lot of people do this for no money. Yeah. And it's for the love, for the passion. And that's why when you're starting a podcast, if I can bring it back to this, the thing that you're talking about, you have to love. Yep. It can't be something like, I'm going to talk about, and this goes to the point about trends, I'm going to talk about whatever, something silly that is trending right now. You're going to wear thin on that. You have to be living and breathing what you're talking about. And that's why for us, pop culture, Star Wars, 501st, all that stuff, we kind of live and breathe this environment. And so it's easy to talk about it. We experience it every day, and we're just translating our experiences through a microphone once a week.
Yeah. It's from like doing it 9 years. I barely make any money off this. The most money I make is on a Fennec Shan t-shirt I sell on TeePublic, which is like, and I was quite fortunate to have that be, it paid for our website. That was it. And
did Disney not rip that down on you?
No, because I made it by I made it by hand, right? So I designed it myself. It's fan design. I've had things taken off of TeePublic. Some things that were legit, I get it, and other things are like, why the hell was this taken down? And like I did this great thing on Supreme. It was called Sithpreme, and it had it was the same art style, same thing, just with Sith eyes in there. And they did, no, we're not gonna do that. I go, dude, you have an actual Supreme logo for sale on your site, and you're not allowing Sithpreme? Come on, that's BS.
Yeah, we dropped our logo inside of a Batman symbol once and put that up there, and that got yanked down. Like we had a couple DC things around like the hype of DC when Batman was coming back and all that, and that all got yanked.
Yeah, it's funny what they find and what they don't find, and that's just the way it goes. But I'm making very little off this, so it comes down to passion. It comes down to, I enjoy this. I'm not doing it for the listeners. I'm doing it because part of me is an educator, part of me wants to teach, and part of me just wants to connect with other people. I am a weird introvert extrovert. I don't like meeting people in real life, kind of just gives me the willies, but talking to people here is a lot easier. I've had some wonderful discussions that podcasting has opened up to me. Like I talked to Jay. One of my favorite conversations was like Paul Sun-Hyung Lee, who I never thought I'd ever connect with.
So cool, man.
JJ McCullough, Spectre Creative. And these are people that you may not know, but I know. I talked to a guy from the Imagination Movers, Smitty, who is I don't know if you watch Disney Plus. He's a children's entertainer, but I love the Imagination Movers. And I was like, I've got a podcast. I would love to talk about children's shows. And he's like, podcast? Sure. And it's like, if I was just a guy phoning up like Paul Sun-Hyung Lee, hey, my name's Rob. You want to chat for about an hour? He's like, hang up. But no, you say podcast? Like, yeah, sure. It tells me you're willing, you've put money into this, you put passion into this, this is like a business or something you want to do. I'm willing to talk to you about that, and maybe just get out there and help you a little bit. It's the minute you say podcast, it tells them that you're committed to an actual conversation.
Yeah. So it's broken down so many barriers between people, like regular people, and people in the past you would consider inaccessible.
Yes.
It's like the social media has done the same thing. Like you can like I can get online right now and tweet at Dwayne the Rock Johnson. He
Yeah.
may never read it, but he also might read it.
Yeah.
And there's 10 years ago, I couldn't have done that. Like you can get the attention of people. You can get people creatives and people that want to also share their passion. Like we're not unique in this idea of wanting to share a passion. We've just gotten behind a microphone and done it. Some people are out there that don't have the desire to do that, but love talking about what they love
Yeah.
talking about their passion, their craft, how they got from point A to point B, telling their story. Everyone's got a story, and we have this brilliant forum to present those stories and interact with those people and learn ourselves, but also maybe someone else out there is listening and learning a little bit too. And that is such a cool reward of podcasting.
Connecting with other podcasters is also a lot of fun, like their shows. So, which kind of leads me to something that I want to talk to you about. I mean, we're promoting other podcasts at this point. Like, what are some of the podcasts that you enjoy listening to right now, or the style? Because for me personally, I've got this long list, and a lot of them avoid the top people like your Joe Rogans or your Chris Jerichos. But at the same time, like there's this one, the Strike Force 5 with Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Fallon. At first, I was like, "Oh, this is just no. I'm not going to listen to these guys. I love these guys, but this is just sounds like." It drives me nuts when you've already got a popular audience. Why are you taking it from my thing? But then you listen to it, it's like, oh, I get it. These guys are good. And for Strike Force 5, they were raising money for their employees during the strike. And I was like, oh, and then Ryan Reynolds is involved. And it's just like, oh, I get this now. I can see why these guys put something together.
Yeah.
But I'm curious which podcasts or podcast genres you listen to.
Top of the list.
Yes.
Generation X-Wing podcast.
Don't do that to me, sir.
Yeah, I'm kind of all over the place, to be honest with you. I'd say my favorite podcast of all time is called the Major Wrestling Figure Podcast.
I've heard of them, yes.
Yeah, Matt Cardona, Brian Myers, Smart Mark Sterling.
Is one of them an actual past wrestler?
Two of them are wrestlers.
Yeah, one was he was the internet champion of the world.
Zack Ryder.
Zack Ryder, yes.
Yeah, so,
Didn't Mac talk to them at some point?
Yeah, that's actually how I found them, was through Sandcrawlers. I listened to Sandcrawlers, and Matt Cardona was on that. And at first, I thought he was a bit of a jerk. And then I listened. I was like, okay, this guy's he's kind of cool. And then I found out they had a podcast, and I've been listening to them for like 4 years now.
Yeah,
I love them for a couple reasons. One, they're hilarious. Two, they have just phenomenal stories. But three, they have this like unbelievable mind for business, and business that was initiated from a podcast.
That's cool.
Their content is always like very heavily collecting focused. And I only do a dabble in wrestling collecting, but the concepts and the passion behind it I always just loved. And so that's probably like my favorite podcast of all time. I got to shout out my good buddy Jeff. He's got one called the Calgary Sessions, and it's an interview style podcast. And he's interviewing people locally, businesses, entrepreneurs, athletes here inside of Calgary. And so I found myself connecting way more fundamentally to the core of Calgary through his podcast. And so love that one. Another one of my favorites that I've got onto recently is The Game, Alex Hormozy. He's this like wild entrepreneur. He owns this thing called acquisition.com. He is a wild man behind the microphone, but I just gobble it up. And I'd say one of my other favorite ones is Insight with Chris Van Vliet. He's also a wrestling commentator, does a lot of interviews with wrestlers and athletes and all that. And so I'd say I've shifted a lot to listening to interviews of entrepreneurs and all that and more recently because of me starting a business. And so I'm trying to listen to a lot and learn a lot more from there. So I'm doing it both from an entertainment perspective, but I'm also been seeking out more educational pieces. And so those are kind of some of the ones that, and I listen to, there's a Disney travel podcast, 1923 Main Street, that I listen to, big Disney fan. And then I dabble in a couple other things like, what else do I got on my list here? My boys over at Vigilante 1939, very similar podcast to the Nerd Room. We're talking about DC stuff and all that. And so I'm
I've
kind of
heard you mention them a number of times, actually.
yeah. They
Did you have
started
them? Did you have them on your show?
Yeah, we've had them on lots of times.
Yeah.
Did a lot of live stream. We met them during the pandemic. Like, never met them in real life. They live
Hmm.
in Chicago. They're great dudes, and like that's the thing. It's like you and I. We met through podcasting, through the Commonwealth, and
Yeah.
met Kyle and Mark and Rob Cass and all those boys. Rob Wade, who then I actually met in person several.
Yeah.
It's really cool that you can do that through podcasting. And
It
so
was great connecting to people like that.
yeah,
It opened up worlds of just friendships. And I mean, I still, you know, I still think about some of the people that the friends we've known in the past,
mhm.
and just connecting and having those chats off air. And I miss some of that sometimes,
Oh
and
yeah,
it's
me too.
learning
Like
off each other.
the camaraderie around, like, for those that don't know, I'm sure you guys that are listening know, like, we all used to be part of the Star Wars Commonwealth, which was this aggregate of like indie, mostly Star Wars podcasts that I think I can't remember when we joined, maybe 2016 ish.
Something like
And like
that.
I found you guys and I pitched us the Nerd Room. I pitched it
Yeah, I do
to
remember
you
that.
guys,
I do remember
and I
that.
emailed. I
Yeah.
said like, "Hey, I love what you guys are doing. I'd love if we could be a part of it."
Yeah.
And I would say honestly, it's probably a big reason why I still podcast was those initial few years of talking, learning, interacting, getting support from all of you guys, and especially like Mark from like originally from Talk Star Wars. Like that guy was an animal of content creation
Hmm. Yeah.
inside of that fan. He made a real legitimate run at making a business out of podcasting.
Yes.
And he eventually burnt out, but he's still to
Yeah.
this day the OG, still to this day
I
one
remember.
of my
Yeah.
podcast inspirations. He is I I still think about how sad it was when he stopped podcasting, because I was like, he at one point was doing daily podcasts that I was listening to. That's how much I loved the content that he was creating.
Yeah.
Just always so high. So it's been
It was
such,
fun listening to him.
it was yeah, it's been
Both him and
such
Rob. So
yeah, Rob Wade, and like
yeah.
I still like talk to Rob Cass all the time,
Yeah.
and Kyle and those like Kyle, Corey, and Carlos from Tommy. Like, this is become a little bit of a share session, but
Yeah.
it's like I think that's one of the personal things that maybe people can take away from this conversation, that podcasting become a really personal thing for you and for your own growth, in the sense that you can find people that share your passion not only for something like Star Wars, but also share your passion for creativity and sharing and community building. And I have met a ton of people through podcasting that I consider very, very dear and good friends. And it might be weird to say that out loud, but man, like, you and I have never met in
No.
person,
Met.
but I have no problem just hitting you up on whatever and just being like,
Yeah.
hey, let's chat. Or same with any of the guys. And like I think I've only ever met Rob Wade in person, and he lives the furthest away from us. But it's one of those things that it can become a very cathartic and personal experience.
Yeah.
Podcasting, just for you personally.
Rob Wade still every once in a while sends me, Rob Cass, I should say, still sends me pictures of his R2, which I just love. And
He's so good at that. Like
he's very good. And it's kind of, we've kind of pulled a little bit of off of each other, a little bit of passion here, a passion there. I mean, I just listened to Ben again, not Ben again. So I just listened to Ben recently on the Skyhoppers podcast, and he's still talking about reuse. He hates them, still friggin' hates them, but it's part of their logo. Reuse is still part of their logo. And it's just like, I remember when we were trying to start the Commonwealth, I was trying to find people that had like minds, and listening to Ben, listening to all these other people. And it was just like, I want to connect with them. Blast Points. I still wish Blast Points would have joined us, because those guys are so knowledgeable, so kind, so fun to listen to. But you mentioned wrestling. I used to listen a lot to Post Wrestling. It was a review away, all this sort of stuff. They did a lot of wrestling talk, and I kind of leaned out of wrestling after a while, but I was totally into it. Tested like Adam Savage's. Anytime Adam Savage has something to say, I'm going to listen to.
Yeah,
he's so awesome. Knowledgeable. I watch more his YouTube show, but he's like I like learning a bit about science and stuff. I'm just looking at my list of podcasts because we're going to wrap it up soon here. But my list I have is one that I've really enjoyed. He's relatively new to me, but you talk about trying to make a business out of this. Canadian History X.
Yeah.
If you like Canadian history, I can't remember. I apologize. I don't remember the host again. I'm listening. I'm binging like from John to Justin, the history of all the Canadian prime ministers. He is a guy who is taking this business seriously and trying to be the next storyteller. And he does a great job researching. He has from pucks to cups, or is it cups to pucks? I haven't listened to that, binge that one yet. But Canadian History X, from John to Justin, he's a Canadian historian at this point, and he does wonderful podcasts, knowledgeable, great to listen to, and trusted in my mind. I feel and he's honest, and I like listening to him. Canadian Politics is Boring is another one of my favorite ones. Two guys from the East Coast, a Welshman and a Canadian. The Welshman is teaching the Canadian about Canadian politics because the Canadian could not be bothered. He friggin' hates politics. And the Welshman is just kind of giving him interesting stories. And it's lovely to listen to a Welshman. And so I listen to him regularly. I love history stuff like Stuff You Missed in History Class. Sawbones is one of my favorites. It's about medical history. I listen to a bunch of science stuff. I listen to I used to listen to Pat, the NES Punk, was completely unnecessary podcast. They've kind of stopped now, but I Less Than 12 Parsecs I still miss. I remember, awesome. Yeah, because he was part of the Commonwealth for a little bit, and his podcasts were like 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and then he's done. And the next day he's talking about something that came in the mail. Then he's done. And I was just like, I still miss listening to those ones. Yeah. And I still tune into like 7x7 and just get a little bit of podcast knowledge off of those guys, or him, I should say.
Yeah, brilliant list you got there. Like you can't deny. And I love, that's the thing too that's great about podcasting. I love the fact that it's all over the place. Like, yeah. When you talk about this concept of you are your own niche, like you just buzz through. You went from like medical history to Canadian politics to wrestling to Star Wars, and like that, like those all don't fit together in like a when you look at this kind of across the board. But inside of the catalog of your phone or of your podcast catcher, it all makes sense to you. And so that's the beautiful thing is that where else can you go to get everything from snackable content to long form content about very specific things? There's nowhere on planet Earth, and that's why I love podcasting so much. Nowhere on planet Earth that you can go and find that at your literal fingertips.
Yeah.
And it's all passive education. It's all passive listening. Like you can listen to a podcast while doing dishes. You can listen to a podcast while commuting or working out or whatever. And so you can be consuming. You can't do that with TV. You can't do that with YouTube. You can't do that with a lot of things where it's just a passive pastime where you're learning. Like there's so much. Like my mom just got into listening to podcasts. She's always about 10 years behind. And
have you heard of Joe Rogan?
She's
like,
new,
isn't he?
This YouTube thing is amazing. And she's like, I've been listening to podcasts. I know you. And I've been podcasting. She's like, I know you podcast, but I just found. And she's like had this like unbelievable awakening in the last like 3 months, finding podcasts that are talking about health and wellness. And she is just like binging through these things and buying books now and investing time and energy into like different breathing exercises and all this. Like she's found this world that like exists. And she was like, where did this come from? There's so much knowledge. I wish I had this when I was your age. And I was like, Bob, this has been around for like 15 years, but it's so cool to see her experiencing finding this medium and just this overjoyed, like, I don't know, like experience that she's having in learning and finding all these niche topics and just being able to consume these things as she's going to bed. Like
my parents just learned about YouTube. Like they just
mine were probably like a year ago, to be honest with you.
I lured them to YouTube because of my show, and they wanted to see me on a show.
Oh, little Robbie, you're doing so
good. Exactly. They bought my shirt when we first produced it, right? And they're wearing it. They're showing a picture. Hey, me and your dad. me and Dad are wearing your shirt. Oh, thanks, Mom. Appreciate that. I even had him on the show a couple times. But then it's just like they're talking about YouTube and watching these castle shows and these renovation shows on YouTube. And it's just interesting watching them discover this weird world that were meant for like 11 and 12-year-olds doing cinnamon challenges or something.
Yeah.
Anyways, we got to wrap it up here, but I want to thank you so much for not just coming on the show, but just the advice and the support you've given to me over the last many years whenever we started knowing each other. And I still miss people like Steve Kirk and those guys. I still think about them. I still have a coin, and it's just like thinking back to these wonderful. What's that? What you got there?
This picture behind me. It's hard to see, but I got a picture behind me that's framed, and it's a Captain America, the evolution of Captain America in the MCU from his first costume in the first Avenger right through to Infinity War.
Yeah.
And it's a picture that he sent me. Like, he was at SDCC, whatever year that was. Must have been 2017. And he just sent it to me. He's like, he wrote me a note and it said, Tim, you had to have this. And it's signed by, I can't remember the artist's name, but the guy that does basically all the MCU art, signed by him. And I was just blown away. So like every time I walk in here, I think of him. Like, it's like he's a friend of ours that passed away. Yeah. But he in the short time that we knew him, he was so kind and generous.
Oh my God, he was a wonderful person. Yeah. He my favorite memory is still doing a GXW trivia show about Rees. And he's on the show and he's winning a lot of these times, but he loses. And Ben, the one who hates Rees the most, actually wins. And it's just him being a part of that and just always willing to just chat and just talk and
he's
be
always
there.
Yeah. He's a wonderful human.
And again, that's the power of podcasting, just being able to I personally like connecting with people who are not the famous people, the down-to-earth people like us, and just listening to what they have to say. And so I wanted to thank you for coming on the show and being part of that world and helping this show grow and just being a friend, obviously, as well. And so thank you. Happy 9 years.
Yeah, you too, man. Like same sentiments back to you. It's been a wonderful journey, and it's been, I think there's still a couple of us still left from the old Commonwealth days.
Oh God, yeah.
It's been awesome that we're kind of starting to kind of wade towards that 10-year piece of things, and
10 years
that we're still kind of going at this. Like, you guys just hit 400. We're gonna hit 400 within this year.
Yeah,
we're a little bit behind you guys there, and when you look at we're gonna hit 500 produced episodes in 2024 as well. Like, we've got a lot of bonus and like after show stuff that we considered full numbered episodes.
Yeah.
So congratulations to you guys. And I will say this, and this isn't me blowing smoke up Rob's butt or anything, but I will say the Generation X-Wing is one of the most underrated fan casts in the history of podcasting. Honest to goodness, I truly believe that between the knowledge that you and your co-hosts hold, your approach, you have a wonderful podcasting voice, by the way. It's very, very soothing.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, there it goes. And I've always loved the way you edit things. You always put that extra little they clip in, that spin in. You're talking about something, you're thinking about it. Oh, boom, there it is. You hear it. It's an audio experience. You guys have done really well, and I can't wait to see where we can take this with, I think, the rise of the niche and the rise of the indie podcast. It's like I think it's on the horizon again, and I want to see both of us be successful in
that'd be awesome. Just a little taste.
Yeah, and success, like, it depends on how you measure success.
Yes,
like,
exactly.
What does success mean? Yeah, if someone
I want Joe Rogan's success. I don't want that.
Well, if someone wants to toss me $300 million a podcast, I will take it. Like, I'm not gonna say no to that. I'm sorry, I'm not that proud.
My dream is to get a play button. That'd be cool.
Yeah, that'd be. You got one of your YouTube videos, don't you?
Oh yeah, it's a phone play button. Or I mentioned this on one of my YouTube shows, my upcoming YouTube shows. This is ultimate dream. This is my make a wish dream. If I get really sick, I would love to be one. And this is inspired by going back to Corey, full circle. Corey talked about one of these questions on the Tumbling Saber. I would love to be just in costume as a Gran on the set of any show or Star Wars movie and just stand there for a second, and that's it. I'm in
that's
canon.
Within reach for you, man. Like, that is not like I don't want us to end up down a tangent, but the things that you do, the things that you build, being part of the 501st, and all the work and effort that you guys put into not only your costumes but doing the charitable things and all that, just amazing stuff. But it's not like, at least from my perspective, it's not unreasonable. And I don't think
it's totally unreasonable to me.
But is it though? Like,
I shouldn't say that. The 501st were stormtroopers in the final scene on season 1.
Exactly. So is it unreasonable to think that you as a scout trooper could be, background scout trooper in a season of the new Mando movie that was just announced? Like, is that? I don't think that's unreasonable.
I can be the Grand Heart player on Navarro. I can do that.
You could do it. Like, I think it's not like, if you were to phone me up one day and be like, Tim, check out episode 4 of season 8 of The Mandalorian, and if you see, just go to 27 minutes and 13 seconds, see the dude playing the guitar. That's me. I'd be like, yeah, I believe that. Like, I understand how you got from that point to this point.
Oh, that'd be funny. Anyway, sorry, I don't mean to talk about my wish list. There you go. All right, so where can we find you, Tim? Where can we find you as the show, as well as the podcasting ventures?
Yeah, so big place for the Nerd Room is just Nerd Room Podcast on literally every single major podcast platform. And the big place with regards to seeing the content that we're putting out is Instagram. We've kind of veered away from X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, and we've kind of re-embraced Instagram there because we find it just a much more positive environment, and that's where we've been sharing stuff. So you can find me there at the Nerd RM. And with regards to PodSummit, if you are a podcaster, a aspiring podcaster, professional, or someone that's just into audio storytelling, whatever, go over to podsummit.com. That's where you can find all the information about what we're doing inside of that event conference space in Canada, specifically September 20th through 21st, 2024 at the Grand in Calgary. That is where the event is going to be held. 2-day event where you're going to be able to interact, learn, network, whatever inside of podcasting. It's all going to be there, that collaborative focal point. So it's podsummit.com. And if you wish to do so, podsummit.ca as well. You can sign up to our mailing list, and that's where you get some of the most information. And you can also follow that venture at PodSummit on Instagram. Is kind of our main place where we're putting out things, but we also have, it's at PodSummit at literally every social platform. It's the exact same thing. If we go back to branding, the exact same thing everywhere. Yeah. So TikTok, whatever, but we'd been really posting there. And LinkedIn is an untapped potential. That's the big one. Gary Vee was talking about that. LinkedIn is where we also post. So LinkedIn, as well as the email list, and Instagram is kind of our main outlets at this point in time. So you can find us all there. And I'd just like to thank you very much, Rob, for having this discussion. I love talking about podcasting.
I really enjoyed this discussion. We could have talked for another hour and a half, and maybe we do this later down the road.
Yeah. I think what we're going to do the inverse, where you're going to come into the Nerd Room.
Yeah.
Or
I'll come in anytime.
I have another podcast that I kind of started doing called the Podcast Experience and all that, where it's kind of like this conversation. And
really? Now I'm tempted to
flip this around maybe and expand a little bit off of this conversation. So maybe a part
that sounds pretty cool.
Day.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this. And as for me, Outer Rim Rookie, the Outer Rim Rookie Show on our YouTube channel, we're 460 something or other on our subs. Get us to 500. I want Jamie to watch Love Guru. Jamie made a promise. If we get to 500 subs, we watch Love Guru, and I want to torture that gentleman. So help us get to 500. New episodes are coming back out. We've got the Christmas break over, and we do Gen X Plays. We got the merch for sale. Thank you so much for everybody who's listened over the last, if you've listened for one day or for the whole 9 years. I know Lady Di's been that person who listened to the whole 9 years. Thank you, Lady Di. But I want to thank everybody who's been listening. And next week, I think we're going to be off a week or so, but we're going to get right back to it late in January once everybody's settled. and we're going to be talking some movies here. I want to start off this year right with The Road Warrior. I want to talk about the Road Warrior movie. So we're going to be doing that. So stay tuned for that. Thank you, Tim. We'll see you guys later, and we'll see you guys later on YouTube and everywhere else. Bye.